Hello and welcome to Another Day, Another Evil. I'm your host, Melissa.
And I'm your host, Georgina, and today it's my turn to bring you a serial killer. Please note this episode discusses child murder, abuse, and graphic violence, so listener discretion is always advised. There are some crimes so disturbing that history remembers the monster more than the people whose lives were stolen. But as always, at Another Day, Another Evil, we do the opposite. This is not the story of a notorious serial killer. This is the story of the children and families left behind by one of America's most horrific predators, Albert Fish. The newspapers called him the Grey Man, the Werewolf of Wisteria, and the Bogeyman. But behind the headlines was a child who had their dreams, routines, and people who loved them. This episode focuses on those victims, the children whose names deserve to be remembered far more than the man who harmed them. To understand how these crimes happened, we need to place ourselves in the time. America in the 1920s and 30s. Children played outside unsupervised, families trusted strangers, and a polite older man rarely raised suspicion. And that's exactly how Albert Fish moved through the world. He appeared harmless. He was a thin, elderly man who was soft-spoken and deeply religious. People often described him as frail, forgettable even, and that appearance was a weapon that Fish used. So I'm going to start at the end, and I'm taking you to 1928 and the case that caught Albert Fish. In May 1928, a young man named Edward Budd, aged 18, placed a classified advertisement in the Sunday edition of the New York World looking for a position in the country. However, that advert would change the Budd family's lives forever. A farmer from Farmingdale, New York, visited the Budd family and promised to hire Edward and his friend and to send for them in a few days. When the farmer returned, he met Edward's younger sister, Grace Budd, who, may I add, was 10 years old, and set his intentions towards her. He made up a story about attending a niece's birthday party and persuaded Grace's parents, Delia Bridget Flanagan and Albert Francis Budd Sr., to let Grace attend the party with him. But he took her to an abandoned house he'd previously picked out, located in East Irvington, New York. And it was there where she was manually strangled to death, decapitated, and dismembered. He allegedly ate most of her remains over the following days. The family reported Grace missing to the local police and the investigation began. Now remember, the name that was given to her parents was Frank Howard, and this person just simply didn't exist. So police arrested 67-year-old Charles Edward Pope, a caretaker, for this crime on the 5th of September 1930 as a suspect due to him being accused by his estranged wife and picked out in a lineup by Grace's mother. He was found not guilty after spending 108 days in jail. But in November 1934, 6 years after her disappearance, an anonymous letter was received by Grace's parents, which led police to the actual killer. And Melissa, I'd like you to read the letter that Grace's brother had to read to his mother because she was illiterate.
So, the letter says, "My dear Mrs. Budd, in 1894, a friend of mine shipped as a deckhand on the steamer Tacoma, Captain John Davis. They sailed from San Francisco for Hong Kong, China. On arriving there, he and two others went ashore and got drunk. When they returned, the boat was gone. At that time, there was famine in China. Meat of any kind was from $1 to $3 a pound. So great was the suffering among the very poor that all children under 12 were sold for food in order to keep the others from starving. A boy or girl under 14 was not safe in the street. You could go in any shop and ask for steak, chops, or stew meat. Part of the naked body of a boy or girl would be brought out and just what you wanted cut from it. A boy or girl's behind, which is the sweetest part of the body and sold as veal cuttle, brought the highest price. John stayed there so long he acquired a taste for human flesh. On his return to New York, he stole two boys, one 7, one 11, took them to his home, stripped them naked, tied them in a closet. then burned everything they had on. Several times every day and night he spanked them, tortured them to make their meat good and tender. First he killed the 11-year-old boy because he had the fattest ass and of course the most meat on it. Every part on his body was cooked and eaten except the head, bones and guts. He was roasted in the oven, all of his ass, boiled, broiled, fried and stewed. The little boy was next, went the same way. At that time I was living at 409 East 100th Street, near Right Side. He told me so often how good human flesh was, I made up my mind to taste it. On Sunday, June the 3rd, 1928, I called on you at 406 West 15th Street, brought you pot cheese, strawberries. We had lunch. Grace sat in my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her. On the pretense of taking her to a party, you said yes, she could go. I took her to an empty house in Westchester I had already picked out. When we got there, I told her to remain outside. She picked wildflowers. I went upstairs and stripped all of my clothes off. I knew if I did not, I would get her blood on them. When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then I hid in a closet until she was in the room. When she saw me all naked, she began to cry and tried to run down the stairs. I grabbed her and she said how she would tell her mamma. First I stripped her naked, how she did kick, bite and scratch. I choked her to death, then cut her into small pieces so I could take my meat to my rooms, cook and eat it. How sweet and tender her little ass was roasted in the oven. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body. I did not fuck her though. I could have, had I wished. She died a virgin. That is disgusting.
Isn't it awful? Imagine having
Yeah,
to read that to your mum about her
just
child.
yeah, just imagine having to read that. I
Yeah.
hope I never have to hear that again. That's awful.
And the end of the letter, the one that pertained to Grace, was found to be accurate in its description of the kidnapping, although we can't confirm whether Fish actually ate any part of her.
I feel like it's a bit of an odd thing to claim if you didn't do it.
Yeah,
But it's such a taboo. I feel like, I mean, he talks about potential, like he could have basically raped her if he wanted to. And like, of all the, I think even in the 20s and 30s, like child rape was definitely not okay. Whereas obviously other forms of rape were seen to be the norm, but
yeah,
definitely at that time period. As far as I know, cannibalism in like kind of the Western world has always not been okay.
yeah,
So, and it's like one of the extreme ends of the taboo. So I feel like you wouldn't claim that unless you'd done it, or talk about it in such great detail unless you'd done it. I've
yeah.
been fantasizing about it. Sorry.
So the letter was mailed on traceable stationery, and once the police attained Albert Fish, he made no attempt at denying, stating he started by intending to kill her brother, and later claimed to his attorney that although he did not rape Grace, he had two involuntary ejaculations while strangling her. And this information was used at trial to make the claim the kidnapping was sexually motivated, thus avoiding any mention of cannibalism. So,
Makes sense. I feel like the rape is enough to, or the sexually motivated aspect of it is enough to make it like a horrendous crime without bringing in, like I'd already said, like cannibalism's like the farthest end kind of the taboo, isn't it? Like the
yeah,
worst
yeah.
taboo
And I
in,
think as
in the
well,
Western world.
and I think as well from like a prosecution point, they couldn't prove cannibalism barring his admittal to it. And if he'd have then turned around and went, well, I admit that up, there's no way that they could have gone, well, actually, no, we can prove that you did it because they couldn't. So I think that avoiding that made it easier for them to also convict him of it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So during the trial, which lasted 10 days, the defense attempted the plea of insanity and claimed
Shock.
that Fish heard voices from God telling him to kill children. Several psychiatrists testified to Fish's sexual fetishes. However, although none of the jurors doubted that Fish was insane, they found him to be sane and guilty of murdering Grace Budd, as they felt he should be executed anyway. An appeals, trial, and plea to the governor both failed, and Albert Fish was electrocuted on the 16th of January 1936 at Sing Sing prison. So, to go back a little bit, Albert Fish was born Hamilton Howard Fish on the 19th of May 1870 in Washington, D.C. to Randall Fish and Ellen Frances Howell. He was the youngest of four to brothers Walter and Edwin and sister Annie. In 1875, his father, who was 43 years older than his mother, died at the age of 80 after suffering a fatal heart attack. This led to his mother putting him in St. John's Orphanage, where he was allegedly physically abused and obtained enjoyment from it. The family had a history of mental illness, with family members being in state mental hospitals. His mother, after getting a job, removed him from the orphanage in 1880. By 1882, he was in a relationship with an older boy who introduced Fish to drinking urine and eating feces. It was then where he began to watch boys undress at public baths and throughout his life wrote obscene letters to women. By the time he was 20, he moved to New York City and engaged in male prostitution and began molesting and raping boys, mostly under 6 years old. His mother wasn't blind to any of this and arranged for him to marry in 1898 to Anna Mary Hoffman, where he had 6 children.
I love how I don't love is definitely the wrong word. Love how the solution of his mother is not fucking get him locked up, but oh, get him to marry a woman. So put this poor fucking woman through all the shit that he's on, bleh,
Yeah, and
all
give
the
him
shit that
children that
he's,
he could then be.
yeah, for the, oh, I'll never understand uh, that kind of mentality of going, oh, I condone everybody else who acts in this way, but because it's my child, I'm going to like just let them be this horrible monster. And obviously, if it goes unchecked, it's just gonna. I don't think I've ever come across anybody who's done something horrible and got away with it, and just that's been a one-off incident.
Yeah. It's
Like,
always mothers as well. It's always mothers with the sons.
yeah,
I
I
think
feel
it's
like
all part of it.
if it was a daughter, she'd have been sent to a mental institution.
Oh,
Using the terminology of the day, like obviously that's not what we term them now, but yeah, like they'd have had her carted off to the asylum.
yeah, 100%.
But because it's a boy, they're like, oh, we'll just inflict him on more fucking innocent people.
Yeah,
Makes me so mad.
I know.
Anyways, I will let you continue. I'm sure I'm gonna get madder.
So I don't know if I actually mentioned this later on or not, but there's not actually any evidence that he did anything to his children. Just as a note there. I don't know if it makes it any better or not.
I was gonna say I don't know if it makes it better or worse to not do it to your own children when you're doing it to everybody else's, but
Yeah. So in 1910, Fish, all from recollection of him working in Delaware, met 19-year-old Thomas Kedden or Bedden. I'm not sure which one it is. Sources say both, so there's some sort of typo somewhere. He started a sadomasochistic relationship, and I can't find out whether it was consensual or not, as Thomas has been suggested to have had some sort of intellectual disability. So I don't know whether it actually matters whether he consented as such. But Fish took Thomas to an old farmhouse with the intention of killing him, cutting him up, and taking him home, but feared that the warm weather would draw attention. So instead, and I don't know which is worse, he tortured Thomas over 2 weeks, cut off half of his penis. He then poured peroxide over the wound, wrapped it in a Vaseline-covered handkerchief, and left him a $10 bill and kissed him goodbye. There seems to be no further information nor records around him.
I mean, I completely understand why this wasn't reported. It's the 20s. I'm guessing homosexuality is illegal at that time.
Yeah. We don't know whether he survived. We don't know
Yeah,
anything, so he might not have even survived.
but to survive the 2 weeks and then been let go, he must have survived, you would expect him to survive at least long enough to have reported it.
Yeah,
But obviously, you're not going to report that because
no,
it doesn't matter if you have an intellectual disability at that time.
no.
You were gay, so God smited you or whatever kind of crap you want to come up with.
In 1917, Anna left Albert Fish for John Straub, a man who boarded with him, which left Fish raising his children alone.
Why did she not take the children?
I don't know. She didn't.
She must have known what kind of fucking psychopath he was. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm throwing
100%,
psychopath
I'm
around
sure.
in a loose term,
Yeah,
non-clinical diagnoses term, but
yeah, yeah. Think that she must have known, considering his mum knew and set her up with him. I don't know whether she just wanted to get out and they like ran away together or what, but yeah, it Fish raised their kids. So he then began having auditory hallucinations. He once wrapped himself in a carpet, saying that he was following the instructions of John the Apostle. It was about this time where he began to indulge in self-harm by embedding needles into his groin and abdomen. And after his arrest, X-rays revealed that Fish had at least 29 needles lodged in his pelvic region. He also hit himself repeatedly with a nail-studded paddle and inserted wool doused with fire liquid into his anus and then set it alight.
oh my God.
Yeah.
How is nobody like intervening?
It was the time though, wasn't it? If stuff like that was happening, maybe people wouldn't intervene because how do you even,
I was thinking like you can just get them carted off to the asylum in that time, but I suppose with him being a man, it's different. If it was a woman, she would absolutely just be sent
yeah.
off. But yeah, oh no. Okay.
So in 1919, Fish stabbed an intellectually disabled boy in Georgetown, and I can't actually find whether he was ever arrested or convicted of this. But he tended to select people who were unlikely to be missed. And that's not what I'm saying. But unfortunately, the time that it was, less value was placed on disabled African American people's lives, and those are the ones that he opted for.
That seems to like contradict, doesn't it, the kind of mental illness side of it, because he's showing enough forethought to pick the like there's a term for it, isn't there? And I can't like in true crime spheres where they often talk like they often use all the examples of the sex worker murders, like the yeah, I can't think what the word is. Somebody's like termed it somewhere and I can't think of the
It's
word,
like
but yeah,
it's the undesirable victim. No, that's not it.
I thought undesirable, but it's not. It's like the unworthy.
Victim status, isn't it? Like
Yeah,
they aren't the
yeah,
value
like a lot
to
of
be an innocent victim.
yeah. So like some of the latest serial killers that you come across, kind of like the Peter Sutcliffes of the world, who targeted specifically like the sex workers because they were those people living.
At the margins of society.
That's it, yeah. And nobody cared. Like people did care about them, but the wider public didn't care about them. When I say nobody cared about them, but yeah. So like this kind of contradicts this idea of the mental illness because if he's targeting these specific victims,
Yeah, there is. Yeah, definitely. In July of 1924, he saw 8-year-old Beatrice Keel playing on her parents' farm alone. He offered her money to look for rhubarb with him, and she was about to help when her mother chased him away. And thank God. A reminder for everybody out there, which I'm sure if you're listening, you already know this, and we don't need to tell you, but adults do not need help from children.
no,
Please do not help adults if you are a child. If you're a child, you should not be listening to this.
yeah,
Albert planned to torture and mutilate children with his, quote, implements from hell. And these were a meat cleaver, a butcher's knife, and a small handsaw. He attempted to test these on a 10-year-old child he had been molesting named Cyril Quinn. Quinn and his friend were playing when Fish asked them if they had eaten lunch and invited them into his apartment for sandwiches. While the two boys were wrestling on Fish's bed, they dislodged his mattress and saw the implements. They became frightened and ran out of the apartment. And again, thank God for them. By 1930, Fish had been arrested 6 times, resulting in a prison term and 2 mental health hospital stays. Yet they were for passing a bad check, embezzlement, and for writing graphic sadomasochistic letters to women.
Yeah, it's strange that, or it feels strange that he actually did have some kind of arrest or kind of comeuppance for the sadomasochistic letters to the women. I feel like women's rights were not kind of as they are now. That definitely comes like, kind of under the like harassment thing that's kind of most relatively new, isn't it? So
Yeah,
seems
yeah, and
maybe it was the violent nature of them.
I think it really shows to how graphic the letters were, and how awful they were.
Yeah.
So that takes us up to where we started off, but unfortunately, it does not end there. After his arrest, additional crimes were discovered, and some were found to be Fish and others were presumed. So I'm just going to go through them now. On the 14th of July 1924, 9-year-old Francis McDonnell was reported missing after he did not return home after playing catch with his friends in Port Richmond, a neighbourhood in Philadelphia. A search was organised and his body was found hanging from a tree not far from his home. It was found that he was sexually assaulted, then strangled with his suspenders. An autopsy found that Francis had suffered lacerations to his legs and abdomen, leaving his left hamstring nearly stripped of flesh. And this case remained unsolved until Albert Fish was convicted of the murder of Grace Budd. Several eyewitnesses positively identified Fish as the stranger seen on the day of Francis's disappearance. In March 1935, after the Budd trial concluded, he confirmed he raped and murdered Francis. Fish began by refusing to admit that it was him. However, later he claimed he intended to castrate him until he heard somebody approach in the area. It was corroborated to be Fish, as Francis's friends said that he was taken by an elderly man with a grey moustache, which matches Fish's description. Further, Francis's mum Anna described somebody in the area that day with the same grey hair and moustache, which led to the nickname the Grey Man. On the 11th of February 1927, Billy Beaton, aged 3, his older brother, and 4-year-old Billy Gaffney were playing in the hallway outside their apartment. The eldest returned inside and the 2 younger boys disappeared. Billy Beaton was later found on the roof and said Billy Gaffney was taken by the bogeyman. His body was never recovered. Peter Kudzinowski was another serial killer active at the time and was thought to be responsible for the crime, but the description of the bogeyman matched Fish, and eyewitnesses identified Fish as the man they saw on the date in question with a little boy. Detectives were able to ascertain that Fish was working at a location a few miles from the abduction site. Billy's mother Elizabeth visited Fish in Sing Sing prison, accompanied by detectives wanting to ask him about her son's death, but he refused to speak to her. And Fish wrote a letter to his attorney regarding Billy Gaffney. And Melissa, again, I want you to read the letter.
I brought him to the Riker Avenue dumps. There is a house that stands alone, not far from where I took him. I took the boy there, stripped him naked and tied his hands and feet and gagged him with a piece of dirty rag I picked up out of the dump. Then I burned his clothes, threw his shoes in the dump. Then I walked back and took the trolley to 59th Street at 2 a.m. and walked from there home. Next day, about 2 p.m., I took tools, a good heavy cat-o'-nine-tails, homemade, short handle, cut one of my belts in half, slit these halves in 6 strips about 8 inches long. I whipped his bare behind till the blood ran from his legs. I cut off his ears, nose, slit his mouth from ear to ear, gouged out his eyes. He was dead then. I stuck the knife in his belly and held my mouth to his body and drank his blood. I picked up 4 old potato sacks and gathered a pile of stones. Then I cut him up. I had a grip with me. I put his nose, ears, and a few slices of his belly in the grip. Then I cut him through the middle of his body, just below the belly button. Then through his legs about 2 inches below his behind. I put this in my grip with a lot of paper. I cut off the head, feet, arms, hands, and the legs below the knee. This I put in sacks weighed down with stones, tied the ends, and threw them into the pools of slimy water that you will see all along the road going to the North Beach. I came home with my meat. I had the front of his body I liked best, his monkey and peewees, and a nice little fat behind to roast in the oven and eat. I made a stew out of his ears, nose, pieces of his face, and belly. I put onions, carrots, turnips, celery, salt, and pepper. It was good. Then I split the cheeks of his behind open, cut open his monkey and peewees, and washed them first. I put strips of bacon on each cheek of his behind and put them in the oven. Then I picked 4 onions, and when the meat had roasted for about 1/4 of an hour, I poured about a pint of water over it for gravy and put in the onions. At frequent intervals, I basted his behind with a wooden spoon so the meat would be nice and juicy. In about 2 hours, it was nice and brown, cooked through. I never ate any roast turkey that tasted half as good as his sweet, fat little behind did. I ate every bit of meat in about 4 days. His little monkey was as sweet as a nut, but his peas I could not chew. I threw them in the toilet. What's he referring to when he says monkey?
I'm not sure whether he's talking about his nuts.
Oh, okay.
That's the only, I'm not 100% sure that's the only lie. And then I assume his peewee is his penis.
Yeah, I thought
That's
that. But
that's
then
the only.
peewees is plural, so maybe it's the other way around.
Oh yeah. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah. Anyway, that's fucking disgusting.
Yeah, I promise that that's the last thing you have to read.
Okay, that's awful. Why would you send that to your attorney?
I have no idea. Not a clue. So
Ugh.
eventually, Fish admitted to both Francis and Billy's murders, which is why they're tied to his name. Yet the entirety of Fisher's crimes will never be known. The police estimate he killed between 8 and 15 children. However, he worked around the country and targeted victims who were poor, including African Americans, who he said the police were less apt to care. I'd like to briefly discuss some of Fisher's suspected victims. In 1926, 5-year-old Emma Richardson disappeared in the Washington, D.C. area and was never found. Fish claimed the killing but gave inconsistent details of the location and date. The Washington Metropolitan Police Department reviewed the file after Fisher's arrest in 1934, but declined to pursue charges as they didn't have a body nor any verifiable physical evidence. Fish admitted separately from the McDonnell confession to an attempted but unfinished attack on a second Staten Island child in the summer of 1924. No identifying details were ever corroborated, and investigators conclude that the admission may have been a composite memory of the McDonnell case. Fish also claimed that he had committed attacks in at least 23 states over 20 years, including murders in Washington, D.C., Virginia, New Jersey, and Connecticut. None were independently verified. Contemporary investigators treated the larger figure as self-aggrandizing rather than a factual admission. On the 14th of May 1927, Yetta Abramowitz was a 12-year-old girl heading to the shops around 4 p.m. with money her mother gave her. When she didn't return home, a search ensued, and at around 10 p.m., she was found on a roof of a 5-story apartment building a few streets away. An ambulance was summoned, which took the beaten child to the hospital, where she unfortunately died. The autopsy disclosed that Yetta had been attacked, strangled, and struck repeatedly with a blunt instrument. She had 5 fractures to her skull, and at the time the word attacked was code word for sexual assault. The tabloid news described the killer as a, quote, sex-crazed maniac with the strength of a gorilla and bestial depravity. Albert Fish, amongst a few other names, have been linked to this, but he is the most often assumed as the unidentified man matching Fisher's description was sighted trying to lure several local girls into dark hallways and alleys on the date of Abramowitz's death. Emil Ayling was a 4-year-old boy who was murdered on the 13th of July 1930, and Fish was investigated for his tragic death shortly before his final arrest. Mary Ellen O'Connor was a 16-year-old girl whose mutilated body was found in the woods in Far Rockaway, Queens, in February of 1932. Albert Fish was considered a prime suspect in her murder, as he had been working as a painter at a nearby house at the time of her disappearance, though he was never officially convicted of this crime. I think it's also key to note here some of his supposed missing victims disappeared around the same time that the Charles Lindbergh baby was kidnapped, which could have taken from the less affluent disappearances. It was Fisher's case which highlighted the societal fears at the time. There was a widespread fear of kidnapping and a significant shift in perception around child safety and the trust placed in strangers. Albert Fish and the Lindbergh baby led to a change in law enforcement, and Congress passed the Federal Kidnapping Act. I think it's mostly linked with the more high-profile Lindbergh baby, however I do think that Fish helped aid this too. History remembers names like Albert Fish because fear leaves a mark. But today we remember the children. Billy Gaffney, Francis McDonnell, and Grace Budd. Not as footnotes, not as statistics, but as children who are loved. And maybe that's the most important thing true crime can do, restore humanity to the people monsters tried to erase. So thanks for listening this week to the case of Albert Fish and the children whose lives he took.
Thank you for listening to Another Day, Another Evil. This show is written and hosted by Melissa and Georgina Scorer. All of our sources can be found in the show notes. Stay safe. Goodbye.